My name is Celia Boone. And I was 29 years old the night I stopped being the star of Miss Adelaide Mercer's private show. For 4 years, she kept a locked glass room behind the main house on Mercer Point, a rice plantation on the South Carolina coast, where the air stayed wet, the marsh hummed after dark, and shame had been arranged like furniture. 10 of us were taken there on a schedule as regular as Sunday bells. Not for punishment, not for labor, for amusement, for observation, for the pleasure Miss Adelaide took in watching decent human bonds come apart under pressure. On the 61st night, when she called for my brother again, we gave her the only ending she had never thought to write. The conservatory sat off the rear veranda, half hidden behind climbing jasmine and a corridor of potted palms. In daylight it looked almost lovely, the kind of place a rich woman might use for tea in winter. At night, it became something else. The glass panes trapped the heat. Oil lamps turned the room honey gold and close. Upholstered chairs formed a little crescent, facing an empty patch of tile like an audience waiting for actors. A narrow writing desk stood to one side with her silver bell, her cut-glass decanter, and the leather notebook where she recorded what she called our responses. That August night the air was so heavy it felt drinkable. I remember the sweat at the base of my spine. I remember the lantern light shining through the fogged glass. I remember hearing my name before I stepped inside. "Celia," Miss Adelaide said, smiling over the rim of her cordial glass. "Come closer. Tonight we revisit family loyalty." That one sentence told me everything. My brother Jonah was already there, standing by the far wall with his hands locked behind his back. 19 years old, and trying to wear a dead man's calm. Amos the field driver stood near the door. Ruth from the laundry kept her eyes on the floor. Dinah, Esther, little Ben, Liza, Abram, and old Mercy were spaced around the room in the positions Miss Adelaide liked, arranged like props she intended to animate. She was 43 then, still handsome in the hard, polished way wealth can make a cruel person handsome. Her dark silk dress was too elegant for the weather. Pearls at her throat, hair pinned without a strand out of place. Nothing in her posture suggested uncertainty. Why would it? For 4 years, every wish of hers had become somebody else's humiliation. She tapped the notebook with one lacquered fingernail and looked at Jonah. "Your sister has always been expressive. I want to see whether grief has made her more obedient, or less." The room went so still I could hear insects throwing themselves against the outer glass. I had spent 11 weeks preparing for that sentence. I had spent 11 weeks watching which servants crossed the back passage after dark, when Master Gideon rode to Charleston, how long the cookhouse fire burned, where the spare keys were kept, how quickly a screen died once it hit thick glass in summer rain. I had spent 11 weeks learning the timing of fear inside 9 other people, pressing on it gently, finding out whether fear had beaten them hollow, or sharpened them into something dangerous. So when Miss Adelaide lifted her glass and said, "Begin," I did not move. At first she thought she had misread me. That was the look on her face. Mild annoyance, nothing more. Then I said, "No." Not loudly. I did not need to shout. The word landed clean in the middle of that room, and changed the air more completely than a storm front rolling off the marsh. Miss Adelaide blinked once. "What did you say?" I took one step forward. I said no. Jonah lifted his head. Ruth looked up. Amos shifted his weight toward the door, exactly as we had planned. Miss Adelaide set down her glass with exaggerated care. "Celia, I dislike repetition. You know that." "I know a great deal about your dislikes," I said. "I know what you do when someone cries too soon. I know what you write down when a mother begs you. I know how much you enjoy brothers and sisters. Her face altered then. Not fear yet. Offense. You forget yourself. No, I said. Tonight I remember everything. Amos slid the bolt across the conservatory door. The sound was soft, final, beautiful. Only then did Miss Adelaide understand that she was no longer the only person in that room with a script. For a moment she stayed seated, as if breeding and posture could still carry the evening for her. Then she reached for the silver bell on the desk. Jonah moved first, crossing the tile in 2 strides and closing his hand over hers before the clapper rang once. The expression that crossed her face at that moment is one I carried for the rest of my life. Not outrage. Not yet. Recognition. The kind that comes when a person realizes power has always depended on somebody else agreeing to perform weakness. She tried to stand. Amos was already behind her chair. Ruth blocked the door to the veranda. Liza and Esther moved to either side of the desk. Old Mercy, who had once told me in a whisper that surviving was not the same as surrendering, came forward with tears in her eyes and steadier hands than any of us. Miss Adelaide looked from face to face, doing the arithmetic too late. Have you all gone mad? No, ma'am, said Ruth, voice flat as a board. No, ma'am, said Ruth, voice flat as a board. We done finished being yours. That should have been the end of the story, maybe. The moment of reversal. The moment the room turned. But stories like this do not live on reversal alone. They live on why. And the why had started 4 years earlier. The first week Miss Adelaide discovered she preferred human shame to any entertainment money could buy. When I was brought to Mercer Point, I was 25 and valuable because I could sew a straight seam, dress a lady's hair, and keep my face still even when I hated what I heard. I had been sold down from Virginia after my former owner died, and his debts were counted more carefully than his dead. At Mercer Point I was assigned to the main house, which should have meant easier work, cleaner work, safer work. People say such things as if danger only lives in the fields. Miss Adelaide first noticed me because I knew how to read a hemline, and because I did not chatter. Silence made rich people imaginative. They take it for mystery when often it is only caution. The conservatory had belonged to Master Gideon's first wife. She kept orchids there, and painted little studies of white herons. After she died, the room stayed shuttered for years. Then Miss Adelaide reopened it. New upholstery, new lamps. A sideboard for glassware. A writing desk, cushions on the chairs. Curtains heavy enough to block any silhouette from the yard. The first time she summoned me there, she said she wanted help arranging linens. When I arrived, the chairs were already set in a half circle. A mirror had been moved into the center of the room. Her cordial glass was waiting on the desk. That was the night I learned there are forms of violence that leave no bruise a doctor will write down. At first, she kept it small. Commands meant to embarrass. Positions meant to degrade. Questions designed to make us betray each other, or ourselves, or whatever shred of privacy slavery had not already stolen. She watched the way some women watch birds through opera glasses. Curious. Delighted. Detached. If somebody wept, she leaned in. If somebody froze, she wrote longer notes. The notebook became its own kind of terror. I saw it by accident one afternoon while dusting her sitting room. She had left it open beneath a hand fan. I should have walked away. Instead, I looked. Subject, Celia Boone. Resistance expressed through facial restraint. Recommend use of kinship pressure. Subject, Ruth. Tears intensify after prolonged silence from others. Subject, Jonah. Protective impulse can be redirected for stronger emotional display. Those were her words. Not cries, not pleas. Not what we were forced to do. Only observations. As if human beings could be reduced to methods. That was when I understood the room was not a hobby. It was a system. There were 10 of us by the second year, not always all at once. Nations on different nights, but the regular ones knew each other by the look that passed on the back steps afterward. The look that said, I know what they made of you, because they made something of me, too. Amos had been chosen because he was strong, and Miss Adelaide liked seeing strength misused. Ruth, because she was proud. Old Mercy, because age did not protect anyone from being made spectacle. My brother Jonah, because he turned 18 and she understood exactly what that would do to me. Liza, because she sang in church with her whole chest, and Miss Adelaide enjoyed discovering what could crack a person's voice. Ben, because he was young enough to blush. Abram, because he always stared back 1 second too long. Dinah, because she once laughed in the yard and Miss Adelaide asked who had given her such confidence. Esther, because she was beautiful in a way cruelty always notices. And me, because I remembered. That was my curse, and, later, our weapon. My mother had taught me letters when I was little, using torn newspaper and charcoal on fence boards until the knowledge lived in my bones. At Mercer Point I kept that secret buried. But memory does not need paper to take shape. I counted nights in stitches, in teaspoons of rice, in the number of times the moon waxed between one humiliation and the next. I kept a ledger where no one could see it. In my head, I knew which nights Gideon was home and which nights he was away. I knew Miss Adelaide preferred cherry cordial in heat, brandy in winter. I knew when she wanted sobbing and when she wanted silence. I knew she reserved family pairings for nights when she felt restless, insulted, or bored. Boredom was the most dangerous mood she had. By the 3rd year she had stopped pretending the room was private amusement and started treating it like serious study. She timed reactions, repeated arrangements to compare outcomes, changed one person in a pair and recorded the difference. She once made Ruth stand motionless for nearly an hour because she wanted to see whether shame deepened or flattened when an audience was denied movement. She once made Amos choose between obedience and protecting someone smaller than himself, then wrote for 3 pages after he broke down sobbing in the garden behind the tool shed. There are people who think evil must look wild to be real. They are wrong. Sometimes evil wears pearls and takes notes. The night that changed everything came 11 weeks before Miss Adelaide died. Master Gideon had gone to Georgetown for business. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like handfuls of nails. The lamp smoked because of the damp. I knew from the way Miss Adelaide had dressed that she wanted novelty. She favored pale blue silk on nights when she planned to be inventive. When Jonah was brought in, I already felt my stomach dropping. She ordered him beside me. Something colder than fear went through my body. It was the cold of understanding. The cold of seeing the exact shape of a line a person means to cross. I will not turn that whole night into entertainment for strangers now. What matters is this. She forced a sister and brother to stand inside a degradation no family should ever be pushed into. She watched us struggle. She watched Jonah try to take the shame onto himself. She watched me beg without words, because I had learned better than to beg with them. And when it was over, she sat back, took a slow sip from her glass, and wrote in her notebook while my brother shook so hard he could not tie his own shirt. That was the night Jonah vomited in the rain barrel behind the kitchen, and kept saying, "I'm sorry," though he had nothing to apologize for. That was the night Amos came, and stood beside him without speaking. That was the night Ruth washed my hands 3 times, because I could not seem to stop scrubbing them. That was the night old Mercy said, very quietly, "Either she dies, or we do." No one answered her. We did not need to. The plan began the next evening in the smokehouse. While hams swung overhead, and flies beat themselves stupid against the slats. Not with speeches. Not with grand declarations. With questions. When does Gideon next leave overnight? Who carries the lantern through the West Hall? Which hinge on the conservatory door complains loudest? Where does Miss Adelaide keep the spare key, if she has mislaid the first? Can Ruth get the younger housemaid sent to bed before the hour? Can Amos keep the stable boy occupied? Can Jonah stand in that room one more time, if the end of it is truly the end? Every question mattered. Every answer had to be sure. We planned in fragments, never all together except once, and only because the storm covered our voices. Ruth used the laundry yard. Amos used the pump by the quarters. I used the sewing room, where women can say almost anything if their hands stay busy, and their mouths do not move much. Old Mercy used prayer meetings, because white people hear moaning and assume heaven is the subject. The first thing we decided was that blood alone was not enough. If Miss Adelaide simply vanished or died badly, every person connected to her would be questioned, beaten, sold, or worse. The room had to produce its own lie. The lie was already waiting for us. Miss Adelaide drank heavily when Gideon traveled, more heavily when she used the conservatory. The household knew it. The doctor knew it. Gideon knew it most of all, and had made a lifelong habit of not seeing what embarrassed him. So we designed an ending from her own habits. If she died in that room with liquor on her breath, broken glass at her feet, and enough confusion in the scene to suggest a drunken accident, Gideon would prefer disgrace, to stay buried instead of inviting the county to peel it open. What none of us could account for was whether we would be able to do it once the moment came. Plans are clean in whispers. Human beings are not. I lay awake for 3 nights before the final one, listening to tree frogs in the ditch and wondering whether my hands would fail me, whether Jonah would freeze, whether fear would make one of us betray the others by trying too hard to survive. Every possible ruin visited me in the dark. Gideon returning early, a key sticking in the lock, a scream carrying farther than we thought, Miss Adelaide sensing something from the set of my shoulders. In the end, what saved us was the same thing that had damned us for 4 years. She never believed we contained full souls. That kind of arrogance leaves a door open no lock can fix. The day Miss Adelaide died, Gideon rode south before noon to inspect a shipment, and sent word he would not be back until morning. I heard it from the kitchen passage, and nearly had to grip the wall to stay upright. By sunset, the house had narrowed into necessity. Ruth sent the younger maid upstairs with a false story about a fevered child in the quarters. Amos arranged for the driver to help with a lame horse at the far barn. Jonah loosened the conservatory bell cord earlier that afternoon, so the clapper would catch if pulled too hard. I mended Miss Adelaide's coral silk sleeve after supper, and listened to her hum to herself while she chose earrings. Her mood bright as a woman dressing for theater. That was exactly what she believed she was doing. At 9:30, she sent for us. The lamps in the conservatory were trimmed low. The glass walls sweated with heat. Beyond them, the garden was all black leaves and moving insect light. On her desk lay the leather notebook, open to a blank page. Beside it stood the cut glass decanter, full of cherry cordial, so dark it looked black in the lamplight. Miss Adelaide smiled when she saw us assemble. My faithful cast. I do so appreciate consistency. There are moments when hatred becomes so cold it feels like clarity. I felt that clarity then. She made a little speech about loyalty, about memory, about tonight being a return to a particularly instructive arrangement. Her eyes kept drifting to Jonah, to me, to the space of tile between us. Then she gave the command she had given so many times before. Begin. And I said no. You already know what followed. The bolt sliding shut, Jonah catching her hand, Amos behind the chair, Ruth at the door, the others stepping into the circle. What you do not know is how quickly fear stripped the varnish off her. 1 second she was Miss Adelaide Mercer, mistress of the house, author of the room, woman who had taken notes while other people broke apart for her pleasure. The next, she was only flesh. She tried promises first. Papers, money, better treatment. She offered to end the performances, as if the future could bargain with the dead part of us she had already made. Then she tried anger. You would throw away your lives for insolence. No, said Jonah, voice steady now. For memory. Then she tried innocence, which was the ugliest thing she had ever worn. Why never harmed you the way real masters do. That was when old Mercy slapped her. Not hard enough to kill. Hard enough to stop the sentence in the middle. The room held after that. No one rushed. No one shouted. The years in us had gone beyond shouting. I went to the desk and picked up the notebook. Its pages fluttered under my thumb. All those tidy lines. All that false control. I read aloud without warning. Subject, Jonah. Protective impulse can be redirected. I turned a page. Subject, Celia. Kinship pressure yields stronger display. Another. Subjects respond well to silence after humiliation. My voice did not shake. I am proud of that more than I can say. Miss Adelaide started crying before I finished the third entry. You wrote us down, I said. You wrote us down like weather, like insects pinned under glass. She looked around the room for rescue and found only witnesses. I set the notebook beside the decanter. You wanted observation, I said. Observe. Amos and Abram forced her back into the chair when she lunged to stand. Ruth took one arm, Esther the other. Jonah stood behind her, not touching, because I knew he should not have to. Ben was trembling so hard his teeth clicked, but he held the door. Dinah pulled the curtains across the interior arch so the room became smaller, tighter, hotter. Old Mercy began praying under her breath, not because she doubted what we were about to do, but because sometimes the human body needs rhythm to survive its own decisions. I poured a cordial glass full to the rim. Miss Adelaide stared at it as if it were suddenly an animal. You don't have to do this. I leaned close enough for her to smell the starch on my dress, the kitchen smoke in my hair, the life she had always mistaken for submission. You taught us that wanting has nothing to do with necessity. She jerked against the hands holding her. Amos tightened his grip. The chair legs scraped tile. I did not break the glass on her. I did not give her the dramatic ending she would have admired. I gave her something simpler, and far crueler. I made her sit in the same chair where she had watched us for years, and I let every person in that room tell her one thing they remembered. Ruth remembered the smell of lamp oil in her hair after one winter night. Amos remembered being ordered to choose between obedience and mercy. Esther remembered Miss Adelaide smiling, while a girl younger than herself cried. Ben remembered learning that adulthood could be manufactured by force. Remembered me trying not to meet his eyes. I remembered her writing while my brother shook. With every memory I poured more cordial down her throat, not enough to drown her quickly, enough to panic her, enough to coat her breath and her dress and the front of the chair, enough to make the room itself smell like the lie we needed. When she choked, old Mercy pinched her nose. When she turned her head, Amos held it straight. When she gagged, she did so in the same room where she had once admired other people's helplessness. Then, when her strength was almost gone, and terror had flattened her into something small and animal, I took the decanter and struck the iron fern stand beside the chair. Glass exploded across the tile. I brought the broken neck down at her temple once. Only once. That was all it took. She folded sideways with a wet little sound and did not rise again. No one moved for several seconds. Not because we doubted her death. Because certainty has weight. Finally, Jonah knelt and put 2 fingers against her throat. He looked up at me and shook his head. It was done. There are no words grand enough for what passed through that room then. Relief was there, yes. So was horror. So was something close to grief, though not for her. Grief for the fact that no one gets led to such an ending unless the world around them has already gone rotten in the root. We had no time to stand inside philosophy. The lie had to be finished. We worked without needing many words. Ruth smeared spilled cordial across the front of Miss Adelaide's bodice and chair arms. Amos toppled the side table. Abram scattered broken glass wider. Dinah loosened the laces at the back of Adelaide's dress to make the scene look more disordered. Esther took the notebook and handed it to me. That part was mine. I carried it to the laundry furnace behind the washroom while the others reset the room. The pages curled black almost instantly. Her beautiful handwriting climbed into smoke and was gone. Every observation, every record, every private little claim to authorship, gone. When I came back, Jonah had positioned the body half-turned beside the chair, as though she had fallen trying to stand. Old Mercy had emptied the rest of the cordial onto the tile. The room smelled like sugar, alcohol, sweat, and hot glass. Perfect enough. Terrible enough. True enough for men who preferred convenience to conscience. Before we left, I looked once around that conservatory. The lamps. The chair. The fogged panes. The empty desk. For 4 years it had been her theater. Now it was only a room. Master Gideon returned just after dawn. His shout brought the household running. By then I was already in the kitchen rolling biscuit dough with Ruth, apron tied, face composed, exactly what the world expected of women like us after a long night of not sleeping. They found Miss Adelaide where we had left her. The county doctor arrived before breakfast was cleared. He was a narrow man with tired whiskers, and the incurious manner of somebody who survives plantation medicine by keeping his inside shallow. He saw the broken glass, smelled the cordial, noted the head wound, and asked only 3 questions. Had she been drinking? Yes. Had she been alone? So far as anyone knew. Was this room often used in secret? Master Gideon stiffened at that one, then said, "My wife preferred privacy." That answer closed the matter more surely than any verdict. Privacy. Such a useful word for the wicked. By noon, the doctor had pronounced it a drunken fall, complicated by choking. By evening the women from neighboring houses were already speaking in hushed tones about nerves, spirits, female excess, and the dangers of isolation in the country. No one suggested murder. To imagine murder, they would have had to imagine us as people capable of planning, remembering, choosing. That leap was farther than most of them could manage. Master Gideon ordered the conservatory locked before sunset. He did not destroy it. That would have invited questions. He merely sealed it, dismissed the staff early, and drank himself stupid in his study for 3 straight nights. I think part of him knew something. Not the details. Not the shape. But enough to understand that if he pried into his wife's private amusements, the rot beneath his own roof would come rising up with them. So he chose silence. Men like him often mistake silence for control. In the weeks that followed, Mercer Point changed in ways too subtle for white eyes and impossible for ours to miss. Amos stood straighter. Ruth laughed once in the yard and did not flinch afterward. Jonah still woke bad some nights, and so did I. But when we looked at each other, there was no longer that single unbearable memory standing between us unchallenged. Something else stood there too. Something chosen. Something fought for. The story spread, because stories like that always do. Not the facts as a court would want them. No court had any business with our truth. It spread as a murmur among laundries, carriage yards, dockhands, wet nurses, field rows, and prayer circles. A mistress with a secret room. A room where shame was staged like theater. A night when the cast refused the script. A locked glasshouse where a woman who loved watching fear finally met her own. By the time winter came, people on plantations 20 miles away had their own versions. In some, there were 20 conspirators. In some, the woman was poisoned. In some, the room burned down. That is how stories travel when they belong to the desperate. They shed facts and keep the part that feeds the living. This was the part that fed me. She was not untouchable. That mattered more than revenge. Revenge was what happened in the room. Meaning was what happened after. Meaning was Amos realizing strength did not have to serve cruelty forever. Meaning was Ruth understanding tears had not made her weak. Meaning was my brother surviving the thing meant to destroy him, and helping write an ending of his own. Meaning was old Mercy 70 if she was a day, sitting on an overturned wash tub at dusk, and saying, "The Lord saw all of it. He just waited on witnesses." I do not tell this story because blood washed anything clean. It did not. The world beyond Mercer Point stayed cruel. Slavery did not end because one woman died on a tile floor with cordial on her lips. The dead did not return. The damage did not wake whole. But something did change. A room built to turn human beings into instruments became, for one night, proof that memory can organize itself into judgment. Miss Adelaide Mercer believed she was the author of everyone inside her glass walls. She was wrong. In the end, the last performance belonged to us.